because the term reflexivity came up in sociology in the 70s, and I only became aware of it relatively recently. But there are really there's quite a separation between economic theory and sociology and anthropology. And I come from economics, so that's to me reflexivity was missing. On the other side, in anthropology, which I know much less, so I don't have the grounding. It was recognized earlier, and I think it has this idea that reality is shaped by values and perceptions and biases has perhaps been carried too far, because sort of the postmodern idiom is that there is no reality, or there's only narrative. Everything is a narrative, and any acceptable narrative, can be considered. And I think that is an excess, similarly to the excess in economic theory, classical economic theory, which comes from the Enlightenment and the belief in separation between the observer and the world. The idea that we are somehow removed from the world about which we observe. So that was one excess, or one misconception. And I think there is another misconception, which is that there is no reality, only a narrative. And I think that a better understanding of the situation is to realize that our biased or processed perception of reality is part of reality and shapes reality. But still, reality can never correspond, or doesn't necessarily correspond to our understanding, and therefore you have unintended consequences. So I find that my view of the world, my epistemology, this idea of reflexivity is a sort of in between these two excesses.
Thank you.
I have a question. You described three conditions of water when you were describing the theory of the reflexivity, and you also make a comparison between three conditions of water defined by temperatures and three conditions of social systems defined by values. And what are those three conditions for social systems?
Well, it's a metaphor I use to describe, open society, which is somewhere in the middle, similar to my epistemology being in between these two extremes. And you have then similarly in real life conditions of extreme rigidity, which are a totalitarian society, or any sort of maybe in past history based on religious beliefs. So it might be an ideology or a religion that imposes very strict rules on society, sort of frozen with little individual freedom. That's one extreme. And then the other extreme, which is an extremely permissive society, a chaotic society, a society in breakdown, or a revolutionary situation. And in the Soviet Union, in the history of the Soviet Union, you had both extremes. You know, you had the Stalinist totalitarian regimes, and then you had the collapse of the Soviet Union and the chaotic conditions that and open society is somewhere in between. And open society can be threatened from both directions. And that was the change in my thinking. I mean, originally I accepted sort of Popper's framework and had this dichotomy between open and closed society. And then when I got involved in the dissolution of the Soviet system, I discovered that there was a danger from the other side. That, you know, opening up a closed society doesn't necessarily lead to an open society. It may just lead to chaos and collapse. And that was that was a surprise to me, and that I was forced to adjust my thinking and
But can you explain more on the values? Because under the frozen situation of the social systems, values were reinforced. The values were reinforced. They were not coming from people.
Yeah.
And you would think that in a steam, like a chaos situation, people are driven by their values, so it must be a reality.
Mm-hmm.
So the chaos state might be a reality of all people driven by different values altogether.
Well,
that's what causes the
so
chaos.
I think the point I was trying to make is that this frozen society is also a self-reinforcing process, which is what you're saying, that up to a point, you see, because it can actually become stronger and more frozen. So it's not this static disequilibrium also has this reflexive connection between ideology and reality. That if the reality can actually reinforce the ideology up to a point. That's what I was saying.
Before we go too far away from the topic, I wanted to back up a little bit. When you talked about the separation of the classical assumption, separation of the observer and the system, and then the process of observation does not affect the system, and that's something that reflexivity disputes. And going back to more basic levels, I've heard one of the concerns regarding reflexivity is this: that if you're a small trader and you observe the system, how does your perception affect reality possibly in any way? Of course, see, I mean, so there might be a difference between a large hedge fund manager versus a small investor. How would you enlighten us?
In a well-functioning market, an anonymous participant does not affect the price. Okay? So there's a process out there which is reflexive. There's an interaction between politics and the market, let's say. There's an interaction between the central banks that take action and make speeches and the reaction of the currency market. So it's out there. You as an individual investor cannot influence that outcome, but you can understand it better than the other guy and guess what the course of prices is going to be. And if you guess better, if you guess well, you make a profit. If you guess badly, you lose your shirt. So that's the way.